evening, folks. Welcome or welcome back to Golem Telly, and Merry Christmas. I am your host, the magical Mr. E. Now, it's the last of my 2024 Christmas specials, and this one is extra special. Let me show you what I've got lined up for you tonight. This is the 1978 Marvel Comics adaptation of the classic Dickens story, A Christmas Carol. Bear but a touch of my hand there, and I will guide you over to camera 2, where we will stick this beautiful comic under the retroscope and zoom in together. Right folks, off we go again, and it's the last of my 2024 Christmas specials here on Golem Telly. This is the Marvel Classics Comics adaptation of A Christmas Carol. It was published in 1978, and it was actually the last of the Marvel Classics Comics series. Issue 36, as you can see here. And over the course of its 36 issues, they adapted some of the greatest literary works in history, including The War of the Worlds, Treasure Island, Robinson Crusoe, Frankenstein, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Prisoner of Zenda, White Fang, The Prince and the Pauper, Robin Hood, Alice in Wonderland. The list goes on. I highly recommend that you check out these other comics in the series, but tonight, if you haven't experienced these comics before, this is a great place to get started. Now, the cover artwork that you can see here, beautiful cover artwork, was actually by Bob Hall, but the comic itself, as you will see, was drawn by Ken Landgraf. Now, Ken Landgraf is still alive, I'm pleased to say. He's 74 years old, I believe. Born in 1950 in Wisconsin, and during his long career, he has worked for both Marvel and DC Comics as the artist on a range of characters including Superman and Wolverine. On the cover you can see our hero here, Ebenezer Scrooge. A little bit of foreshadowing going on here in the corner. He's surrounded here by the 3 Christmas spirits. There's the ghost of Christmas past, there's the ghost of Christmas present, and here, this shadowy figure in the middle, is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And in this central panel here, you can see Bob Cratchit, who works for Scrooge, and he's holding his little boy, Tiny Tim, on his shoulder. And they both look very happy, in stark contrast to the miserable Scrooge. How did Scrooge get to be so miserable? Well, if you didn't know already, then you're about to find out. On the inside front cover, there's a little bit of information about the author, Charles Dickens, born Charles John Hupham Dickens. Now, it says here that he was born in 1822, but that's not correct. It was 1812. If he'd been born in 1822, then he would have been only 21 years old when A Christmas Carol was published, and he wasn't. He was 31. A Christmas Carol was published in 1843. And quite a few of the dates in this introduction are actually inaccurate. Nowhere more clearly than here, where it says he married in 1863 but was separated from his wife in 1858. So unless he managed to figure out how to invent time travel, then that obviously could not have happened. Actually, he was married in 1836, so they just got the 6 and the 3 the wrong way around. It happens. This here at the end is the bit most worth noting. It says Dickens' work reflects a growing bitterness towards Victorian society's uncaring attitude towards its poor. He was very concerned about the plight of the poor and wanted to do whatever he could to bring their struggle to the attention of the wider population. And he certainly managed to do that with this classic story. And this Marvel Comics adaptation is pretty faithful. Obviously, it doesn't include all of the text of the original novella, but what it does take from the original is imported pretty faithfully, and certainly the most important elements of the story all make the journey from written prose to comic book panel intact. Oh, but Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck a generous fire. No wintry wind that blew was bitterer than he. What a smashing simile that is. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck a generous fire. Brilliant. That's why we love Dickens so much. He was a genius. Alright, so we're kicking off here with Stave 1, and it's all about Marley's ghost. You know who Marley was. He was Scrooge's former business partner, and he was dead to begin with. Yes, old Marley was as dead as a doornail, and Ebenezer Scrooge knew it. So they'd been business partners for many years, and, well, you couldn't really call them friends, but they were the closest thing that either of them had to an actual friend. But it was really all about making money. That's what they had in common, and that's why they were such good partners for one another. And they made a fortune, but they never spent any money on themselves or anybody else. It's 7 years after the funeral of Jacob Marley. It's Christmas Eve, and old Scrooge is sitting busy in his counting house. And he's so mean. Poor old Bob Cratchit there is freezing. Just wants to put another piece of coal on the fire, but Scrooge will not have it. Waste another coal on that grate, and you may find yourself employment elsewhere. Anyway, just as Scrooge is being mean to poor old Bob Cratchit, in walks Fred. And this is Scrooge's nephew, and Fred's a really nice guy. He comes in the front door of the counting house, and he bids Bob Cratchit a Merry Christmas. And he offers the same to Scrooge. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God save you." To which Scrooge replies, "Bah! Humbug." And Fred can't quite get his head around this. He says, "Come on, Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Surely you don't mean it?" "I do. Merry Christmas. What reason have you to be merry? You're as poor as a dormouse." And Fred's pretty quick, actually, off the mark. He says, "Well, what reason have you to be morose and dismal, Uncle? You're rich." It's a good point. Now, Scrooge doesn't like this. He just wants to get on with his life and not be interrupted by cheery people. He was quite happy being miserable, thank you very much. And he says here, "If I had my way, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips would be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart." And he asks Fred what good Christmas has ever done him. And Fred has a very good answer here. He says, "There are many things by which I have derived good, but by which I have not profited, and Christmas is certainly among them. It's a time to think of people less fortunate as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Therefore, I believe Christmas has done me good, and I say, God bless it." And at this point, poor old Bob Cratchit, he can't help himself. He stands up and he applauds and he says, "Bravo!" Scrooge does not like that at all. "Let me hear another sound from you out there, and you'll celebrate Christmas by losing your job." Fred asks Scrooge, not for the first time, if he will come and join them for Christmas dinner the next day. And Scrooge basically says, "Nah, you're all right." Anyway, Fred realises it's time to get out of there because he's not going to change his uncle's mind. So he says Merry Christmas to Bob Cratchit one more time. Bob Cratchit responds in kind. "Thank you, sir, Merry Christmas." And just as Fred leaves, two other people come in. And these two people here are charity collectors. And I don't know why they bother. They're not going to get anything out of Scrooge, but credit to them, they give it a go. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" You see, what's happened here is Scrooge is so mean that he hasn't bothered to paint over Marley's name, even though he's been dead for 7 years. It's much cheaper just to explain what happened, and he says, "Marley died 7 years ago this very night." And so the charity collector says, "Well then, we have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner." Oh dear, Scrooge does not like the sound of that word. "Liberality?" "Yes, Mr. Scrooge. A few of us are raising funds to buy the poor some food and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time when want is keenly felt, and the idea of want is going to be returned to again in this story. Want and ignorance are both personified, as you will see later on. They are both at the heart of the message that Dickens is trying to deliver here." So the charity collector begins his assumptive close and he says, "What shall I put you down for?" To which Scrooge replies, "Nothing." The charity collector doesn't quite get that. He says, "Oh, you wish to remain anonymous." Now, of course, as we all know, anonymous donations are the best kind of donations. If you want to be charitable, do it properly. Don't make a big song and dance out of it. But Scrooge clears up the confusion here by saying, "I wish to be left alone. Those who are badly off can go to prison or work in the treadmill." So yeah, basically, you heard him right. Scrooge is saying that if they're poor and too poor to support themselves, well, I pay my taxes pay for prisons, so let them go there. Look at how shocked this charity collector is. "But many can't go there, and many would rather die." Oh dear, he's going to go there. "Then let them." Really? "At least It'll decrease the surplus population. I mean, he's happy for them to die. This is the kind of guy we're dealing with. No human warmth or compassion whatsoever. Not good. So they scarper pretty quickly. It's pointless wasting their time with Scrooge. This poor little carol singer soon finds out that he started to sing his song outside the wrong door. Scrooge grabs his ruler and throws it at him. Now he's about to close up the counting house for the night, and he has another little argument with Bob Cratchit. He knows that Bob Cratchit wants to have Christmas Day off, which as far as Scrooge is concerned is just ridiculous. To Scrooge, taking Christmas Day off is a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But he says, okay, fine, whatever, take your blinking Christmas Day off, but you better get here all the earlier on Boxing Day. And off Bob goes back to his family. And Scrooge has dinner in the pub, and then he goes home, and that's when strange stuff starts happening. He gets to his front door, his knocker seems to change before his eyes, turning into the face of his former business partner. And then this phantom coach and 6 horses rides up his staircase, goes straight past him. But he imagines he's just eaten something that's disagreed with him, and he decides not to worry too much about it. But he is a little bit freaked out by this. He then starts seeing Marley's face in the tiles around his fireplace. And then he hears a bell ringing. Now, bells ringing in Victorian times were definitely a sign that ghosts were nearby. And so it proves to be, because the ghost of Jacob Marley appears to him. He comes clanking and chanking and clinking, making his way up the stairs, passes through Scrooge's door, and Scrooge, of course, is terrified here, but he asks him, "What do you want with me? And who are you?" And Marley's ghost says, "I want much, and ask me who I was." And Scrooge is very frightened here, but he plays along. He says, "All right, who were you?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley, but you don't believe in me. Why do you doubt your own senses?" And Scrooge's excuse here is that a slight disorder of the stomach makes them unreliable. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than the grave about you, whatever you are. Despite Scrooge's attempt to be waggish, the truth is he was merely trying to keep down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow of his bones. Now, you see, the thing about Scrooge is he's become so desensitized to everything that goes on around him that he feels no emotion, and he's not interested in the lives of anybody else. So when we see Scrooge is actually afraid, then that's a good sign. It means he's beginning to show the very earliest flicker of some kind of emotion. And as we go through the story, the emotions become stronger and more clear, and ultimately they lead to his reclamation. Marley has a right go at him and says, "Look, do you believe in me or not?" And Scrooge concedes, "I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?" And Marley explains, "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. If that spirit goes not forth in life, then it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and might have turned to happiness." And you can see how tormented the spirit is here. The bottom line is, he had a chance to be helpful towards other people when he was alive, just like Scrooge has now, but he wasted it. He didn't do any good for anybody else. He just spent his life making more and more money alongside Scrooge. And now, when that money doesn't do him any good whatsoever because he's passed on, what he realizes is that the true joy of life would have come from being a better citizen, a kinder person. But now, it's too late. Now, as a spirit, he wants to intervene in the hardship that he sees all around the world, but he can't do so. And that is its own torture. And he has a warning for Scrooge. He says, "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern so strange to you? Your chain was just as long and heavy as this one 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. Yours is a most ponderous chain." Scrooge says, "Mine?" He can't see it, so he doesn't believe that it's there. But he pleads with Jacob Marley. He says, "Tell me more. Speak to comfort me, Jacob." "Comfort is no longer mine to give," So they discuss the plight that Jacob Marley now finds himself in, and Marley continues to warn Scrooge of his own impending doom, but he offers a glimmer of hope. "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Scrooge does not like the sound of that. He says, "Well, if that is the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob, I think I'd rather not." Marley tactfully ignores that particular comment and continues, "Without their visits, you cannot hope to avoid the path I now tread. Expect the first spirit tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. I do like this line here. "But couldn't I take them all at once, Jacob, and have it over with?" No, you can't. You got to have them one by one. Expect the second spirit on the next night at the same hour, and the third upon the following night when the last stroke of 12 has struck. And Jacob Marley disappears through the window now, and Scrooge watches him go, and he sees him join all the millions of other tormented spirits who want to help people but no longer have the power to do so. They squandered that opportunity when they were alive, and now they suffer for all eternity. The misery within them was all clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, but had lost the power forever. Scrooge gives this some thought. He wants to say humbug, which is his favourite word in the whole world, but it doesn't come out as easily as it usually does. So, again, as we can see, for the first time, he is beginning ever so slowly to reflect on the error of his ways. And then we're straight into stave 2 here, the first of the 3 spirits. And Scrooge is waiting and waiting and waiting, and he starts to think this spirit isn't coming, and then maybe he dreamed the whole thing, but he's about to find out that it wasn't a dream. Or was it a dream? I often wonder if the story is meant to be a dream after all. I think you can read it in whichever way you want. It's either real, and the ghosts were really there, or it was a dream, and Scrooge has finally managed to reflect on the error of his ways and do something about it. And he wakes up on Christmas morning a changed man. But it's up to you. So here is our Ghost of Christmas Past, and he is shining very brightly. Now, when Dickens describes him in the novella, he is almost impossible to picture. He's constantly changing. Sometimes he's got many arms, and sometimes many legs, and sometimes many heads. And I think the idea there is that it's meant to embody the idea of many different pasts, all squeezed into one single character. Anyway, here, he just looks like an old man in a tunic, shining very brightly. "You're so bright. Could you perhaps put your cap on?" "What? Would you so soon extinguish the light I give?" The Ghost of Christmas Past has lots to show Scrooge, and he can't afford to waste any time. And Scrooge asks him here, "Might I make so bold as to inquire what business brings you here?" And the spirit says, "Your welfare, Ebenezer Scrooge, and your reclamation." And he tells Scrooge to take his hand. "Bear but a touch of my hand here, and you shall be upheld in more than this." Out they go through the window, and they are flying. It's a bit like the snowman, isn't it? Even as these words were spoken, the city vanished, and with it the fog and darkness replaced by open country covered in fresh snow, sparkling in the clear daylight. And Scrooge recognises this place. He says, "Good heavens, I was a boy here." We are now going to see Scrooge's childhood. Let's take a look. Now, as you know, nostalgia can be a very powerful thing, and the mere sight of where he grew up is enough to cause Scrooge to, well, almost to cry a little bit. "Your lip is trembling, and what is that on your cheek?" So again, we're beginning to see Scrooge opening up a little bit. He's starting to warm up at last, but he's still got a long way to go. And we see Scrooge at his old school. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, has been left behind. So we can see the seeds that were sown that led eventually to Scrooge becoming this lonely, isolated character, driven to protect himself and those closest to him, which we'll get to in a moment. But eventually it all gets out of hand and he winds up just being obsessed with gain. Anyway, there are these lovely moments here where Scrooge remembers being absolutely enchanted by the books that were his only companions as a boy. He didn't really have any friends to hang out with, so instead he immersed himself in literature. And I like the way this has been done in the comic here. Images from each of these classic stories appear in this window. This one is Ali Baba. Yes, one Christmas time when I was left here all alone, Ali Baba did come just like that. And there's Aladdin with his lamp. And the genie, the wonderful, wonderful genie. And there goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Okay, so clearly the young Scrooge had a vivid imagination and he was an excitable, positive young man, but the way in which he was neglected had a powerful and lasting negative impact on him. Poor kid. And now the scene changes and we see Scrooge as an older boy, and we're introduced to his sister, his little sister Fan. I've come to bring you home, dear brother, home for good, forever and ever. Father's so much kinder now, and home's like heaven. And the fact that she says, Father's much kinder now, tells us pretty clearly that up until now he hasn't been very kind at all. Now the ghost of Christmas Past notes that she was always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart. He reminds Scrooge, she died a woman and had, as I recall, children. Not children though, one child, and that child was Fred, Scrooge's nephew, the nephew that we met in Stave 1. Although they had just emerged from the school, Scrooge felt an uneasiness of the mind, but just for a moment. Okay, he's doing some deep thinking. This is good news. Now, the ghost of Christmas Past takes Scrooge from memory to memory, and having left his childhood behind, we now see his first place of work, and it's Fezziwig's warehouse at another Christmas time. And what we get to see here is how an employer should behave, how he can make the lives of his employees so much more bearable and pleasurable than they would otherwise be, simply by taking care of them and showing them a little bit of kindness and basically treating them like human beings. And it's Christmas Eve and Fezziwig is ready to shut up the shop and have a great big party. And he does. He orders everybody to clear away all the tables and chairs and make room for the band and the dancers and all the food, and essentially they have a great big knees up. And Scrooge realizes here that it didn't take much to make all those people so happy. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gave us is just as great as if it cost a fortune. And again, this causes him to pause for thought for a second. You've stopped. What's the matter? And he's thinking here of just how unkind he's been to Bob Cratchit, and he wishes he could say something to him right now. As Scrooge gave utterance to his wish, the light upon the spirit's head burned very clear, and then, my time grows short. Quick, we must see yet another Christmas Past. And this one really is quite painful actually for poor old Scrooge to witness. He sees his former girlfriend, Belle, and unfortunately she's breaking up with him. Again, Scrooge saw himself older now and with a face that had begun to wear the signs of greed. He sat by the side of a fair girl in whose eyes shone the glisten of tears. And she tells him straight, she says, "Another idol has displaced me." What idol? A golden one. And they argue about it back and forth. She says, "You fear the world too much. All your old hopes have merged into the single hope of conquering worldly hardships. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off, one by one, until the master passion, gain, obsesses you." And she says, "Look, I'm sorry, but I must release you." He says, "Have I ever sought release?" She says, "Not in words, but in a changed nature, an altered spirit. I must release you, and with a full heart, for the love of him you once were." And this is really too much for poor old Scrooge now to bear. He can't stand it. "Spirit, show me no more. Why do you delight in torturing me?" But there is more. He is shown Belle's future husband and her family. It could have been Scrooge, but he blew it. "Spirit, remove me from this place. I cannot bear it. Take me back. Haunt me no longer." And he grabs the spirit's little cap here and he puts him out. Ebenezer Scrooge fell back, exhausted, and sank into a heavy sleep in his own bed. But if he thought it was over, well, he's got another thing coming, because the bell strikes one, and it's the second of the three spirits. And here he is, this guy who looks like Father Christmas. That's the ghost of Christmas Present, the very embodiment of that Christmas spirit that we all know so well. He's actually the 1843rd Christmas spirit. What with it being the year 1843, he's had 1,842 brothers. They've all lived and died on one day only, Christmas Day. And today, it's this chap's turn. Now, Scrooge is beginning to experience some change here. He's seen quite a lot already thanks to the Ghost of Christmas Past, and he is very positive about the prospect of changing his ways. He says, "Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night against my will, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have anything to teach me, I am willing to profit by it." "Then touch my robe, Ebenezer Scrooge." And as he does so, off they go. They stood on the city streets on Christmas morning. There was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the summer sun could never match. And the effect of the Christmas spirit is kind of captured here by the idea that the spirit is sprinkling blessings from his torch. And even though no one can actually see him on Christmas Day, everywhere he goes, he spreads that joy and happiness around. Now, the spirit eventually leads Scrooge to Bob Cratchit's house. The Cratchits don't really have much money at all. Bob Cratchit earns 15 bob a week. That's really not very much. Here we see Bob Cratchit coming home from church with Tiny Tim, and Mrs. Cratchit asks Bob, "How did Tiny Tim behave in church?" Bob says, "As good as gold, and better." He gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things. Coming home, he told me that he hoped the people saw him in church because it would be nice for them to remember on Christmas Day the one who once made lame beggars walk and blind men see. I mean, come on. It hits you right there, doesn't it? And though Bob Cratchit was obviously proud of his little son, his voice was tremulous as he related the selfless wish. And his voice trembled even more when he insisted that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. But with one look, Scrooge knew it was a lie. "Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live." Well, it's not good news. "I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no, kind spirit, say he will be spared." And this is where the spirit takes the opportunity to throw Scrooge's horrible words right back at him. "If he is going to die, why not let him? At least it will decrease the surplus population." Oh dear. And now Scrooge realises he should never have said that. What a horrible thing to think, let alone say out loud. Scrooge was appalled to hear his own words quoted by the spirit and was overcome by penitence and grief. And Scrooge bent his head in shame for a time unknown. Now, despite having very little money to spend, they've managed to put together a decent Christmas meal. Well, I mean, I say decent, but actually it was a very meagre meal. And they didn't even have a turkey. I think they had a goose. Or was it a duck? Can't remember now. Anyway, not a very big bird, but they don't grumble about it. They just get on with it and enjoy the day. Bob, being the kind-hearted fellow that he is, he wants the family to raise a glass and toast his employer. "I give you a toast to Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." She's not very happy about that, his wife. The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon and hope he'd choke on it. Wow, she means it too. She hates Scrooge, and in fact, they all do really. But Bob pleads with his wife. He says, "Come on, dear, it's Christmas Day." And she says, "Very well. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, but not for his." They all drink the toast, the first in which there was no heartiness. Scrooge was the ogre of the family, and the very mention of his name cast a dark shadow over the party for a full 5 minutes. Scrooge is led away by the Ghost of Christmas Present, and the last thing he sees is the face of Tiny Tim. And Scrooge is worried that he's not going to make it. Well, he'll find out soon enough. In the meantime, the spirit takes him from place to place again, showing him all the joy and happiness that people are experiencing on Christmas Day, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Here, some miners are gathered, and they're singing heartily anyway, despite being poor and cold and exhausted. And take a look here. The spirit of Christmas is aging visibly, and of course that's what happens, isn't it? As the day goes by and we get to the end of Christmas Day, that Christmas spirit begins to evaporate. We can sense it, can't we, on Christmas Day? At midnight, that's when the spirit of Christmas dies once again, and we have to wait another year for the next brother in line to come along and spread joy and happiness all over again. But we're not quite done yet. The spirit takes Scrooge to his nephew's house, and he gets to see them all having a wonderful time, enjoying the day, having a big party, drinking, celebrating, and even when they talk about Scrooge and kind of mock him, he doesn't mind so much. He just wants to be a part of the day. They didn't devote the whole evening to music. No, they eventually switched to all manner of parlour games, and soon Scrooge was enjoying himself enormously. And they're doing an impression of Scrooge. I've got it! It's Uncle Scrooge! And Scrooge is enjoying it. He says, yes, it's me, look at me growl. So he's being a good sport, which is nice to see. He's enjoying himself even when the results of a round of charades were none too flattering. Will you be playing charades on Christmas Day? I will. I'm looking forward to it. And now we can see here that the Christmas spirit has almost had it, but he's got one more important job to do before he disappears altogether. And that is to show Scrooge two small forms, wretched, frightful, hideous, and miserable. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in humility. Spirit, what are they? Are they yours? They are man's. The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both, Ebenezer Scrooge, but most of all beware the boy, for on his brow is written doom. And Scrooge is kind of a changed man now. He wants to do something to help. He says, have they no refuge or resources? But once again, the dying Christmas spirit here, he throws Scrooge's earlier words straight back at him. Those who are badly off can always go to prison, Ebenezer Scrooge, or work in the treadmill. And Scrooge realizes that he was wrong all along. The bell struck 12, and as the last stroke ceased to vibrate in the thick fog, Scrooge found himself all alone, remembering the final prediction of old Jacob Marley's ghost. Do you remember what that prediction was? 3 spirits. And how many have we had? 2. Okay then, brace yourselves, because here comes another one. All right then, here we are, stave 4, the last of the spirits. Scrooge looked deep into the gloom and beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded in black, coming like mist along the ground straight towards him. And in this character here, who of course very much resembles the Grim Reaper, is the third of the spirits. Am I in the presence of the spirit of Christmas yet to come? But the phantom answered not. Instead, all the ghost does here is point with its bony finger. You want to show me the shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time to come? Is that not so, spirit? And he's trying to be cooperative here. He just wants a chance to change his ways so that he can avoid a terrible fate. He gets it now, but there is still more for him to see, and it's not going to be easy. So we're flashing forward here to Christmas in the future, and the spectre points to a group of familiar merchants. Scrooge notes that they had not aged much, and he listens into their conversation, and this one says, I only know he died last night. I thought he'd never die. What was the matter with him? God knows. What has he done with his money? Left it to the company, probably. Certainly hasn't left it to me. Now we know, a little bit of dramatic irony here, we know they're talking about Scrooge, but Scrooge doesn't realise this yet. And there are more of these conversations that Scrooge gets to witness, but he doesn't quite understand why the spirit is showing them to him. Scrooge was surprised that the spirit attached any importance to such trivial conversations, but feeling certain that they must have some hidden moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure every word he heard and everything he saw, especially the shadow of himself, when it appeared. And so here we are at Scrooge and Marley's, and Scrooge is expecting to see a future version of himself, but when they pass through the wall, he sees somebody else sitting in his counting house. Still, this did not surprise him, since he had already resolved to change his old way of life. Here then, as far as Scrooge is concerned right now, was the proof in his very absence from that gloomy counting house. And then the spirit takes him to this awful place. It's Joe's pawn shop. This is pretty grim. We see gathered here a group of people, all of whom have brought their spoils to sell at the pawn shop. And what are those spoils? Well, they are bundles that include Scrooge's personal effects. And not just that, but even his bed sheets. That's right, this lady here has dragged the bed sheet from under Scrooge's corpse and has brought it to Joe's to sell for a few pennies. And Scrooge still doesn't realise that it's him they're talking about. Scrooge recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed and he had touched something on a bare sheetless bed, something which, although it could never speak again, announced itself in awful language. It's a corpse. And it shocks and terrifies Scrooge, even though he doesn't realise that it's the corpse of himself a few years from now. He's horrified by this. He says, "Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. But let us go." But the spirit insists on pointing towards the head of the corpse. "I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power to look upon his face." He can't bear to look at the face of the body lying on the bed. The sheetless bed. Ugh. So in desperation, he pleads with the spirit. He says, "If there is any person in this town who feels emotion over this man's death, then show that person to me. Spirit, I beseech you." Well, the spirit does do that, but not quite in the way that Scrooge is expecting. And we have this scene here where some of Scrooge's tenants, who are about to be turfed out of their home for not paying their rent, celebrate the news of his death. Remember, Scrooge still doesn't realise that it's him they're talking about, and he tries something else. He says, "Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or that dark bed chamber we just left will haunt me forever." Now the spirit seems to nod here, and suddenly, well, I'm sorry folks to have to break this to you, but we're at the Cratchit's house again, and this time it's a far more sombre place, because poor old Tiny Tim has passed away. And the whole family here, they're all trying to support one another. "Don't be grieved, Father, please don't." And Scrooge, on seeing this, he sobs, shocked and saddened all at once. And this really is heartbreaking stuff. "My little child, we shall never forget him, shall we?" "Never, Father, never." And a scene of tenderness it was, tenderness to make the heart sore and ache from the soaring. Now we're getting towards the end here, and Scrooge knows it. "Spirit, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. Tiny Tim has died. But please tell me, who was the man we saw lying dead?" And next thing we know, we're in a churchyard. A worthy place indeed to learn the wretched man's name. And the penny is beginning to drop here, I think. Scrooge is very, very anxious at this point. He says, "Before I draw nearer to the stone at which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that only might be?" Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave. "Well, the courses of men's lives foreshadow certain ends to which they must lead, but if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me." And so Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, following the finger until he could read the name upon the headstone of the neglected grave. No! His own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "I was the man who lay upon that bare bed." The finger pointed at his heart and said more loudly than any word, "Yes." And this is it. It's the turning point. He had to go through that final shock to get to where he needed to be. "Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I once was. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" And it's a fair question. After all, Marley did say that the spirits were there to help him. For the first time, the finger appeared to shake. "Good Spirit, your nature pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by altering my life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, present and future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they have taught. Oh, tell me that I may erase the writing on this stone." In his agony, Scrooge caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty. And the phantom shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Okay, folks, you know what's coming. It's stave 5, the end of it. The bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, The time before him was his own to make amends in. The shadows of things that would have been can be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. I'll make them change. Merry Christmas to everybody. And he gets dressed, and in his excitement, he rushes to the window, he looks out, and he sees a boy on the pavement down below. He says, "Delightful boy, what's today?" "What's today? Why, it's Christmas Day, of course." "Christmas Day! The spirits have done it all in one night." And then he has a great idea. He says, "Do you know whether the poulterers around the corner have sold their prized turkey? Not the little prized turkey, but the big one." "But the one as big as me? It's still hanging there." "It is? Well, go and buy it and tell them to bring it here so I can give them directions on where to take it." And you can see him being generous here, and the right kind of generous. He says, "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit, but he'll never know who sent it." Ha! A mystery twice the size of Tiny Tim. That's right, folks, that's the way to do it. Being charitable without bragging about it. And best of all, without revealing where the charity comes from to the person or the people who are receiving it. And Scrooge has a wonderful Christmas morning. The turkey arrives, he gets it sent over to Bob Cratchit's. He has a shave, which is hard to do when you're dancing around like a lunatic. He goes for a walk and people wish him a Merry Christmas. And then he bumps into the charity collector here. "My dear sir, I hope you were successful yesterday. Merry Christmas." And the charity collector can't quite believe what he's hearing here. He says, "Mr. Scrooge? You are the same Mr. Scrooge?" And he starts to make amends for all his meanness in the past. He says, "Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness to accept this?" "Well, Lord bless me, my dear Scrooge. Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious, my good sir. A good many back payments are included in that." And then Scrooge goes to church, and afterwards he visits his nephew. "Why, bless my soul, it's Uncle Scrooge." "I have come for dinner, Fred. Will you let me in?" Scrooge was at home in 5 minutes. It was a wonderful party with wonderful games, wonderful music, wonderful happiness. And Scrooge now has discovered this whole new fun side of himself. He was early at the office next morning to catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the one thing he had set his heart on. And he winds up poor old Bob Cratchit here. He says, "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" Pretending to be the old Scrooge, you see. And Bob Cratchit says, "I'm sorry, sir. I am late, but it's only once a year. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." And Scrooge cannot resist the opportunity to tease poor old Bob Cratchit. He says, "Making merry, were you? Well, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm going to raise your salary." I love Bob's face here. He just can't believe what he's hearing. "A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier one than I've ever given you. We shall discuss your future affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of plum pudding. Go out and buy us a large load of coal before you cross another T, Bob Cratchit." So we can see he has truly mended his ways. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He had no further dealings with spirits, but it was always said of him that he knew how to keep the Christmas spirit well, if any man alive possessed that knowledge, and may that be truly said of us, all of us. For as Tiny Tim observed on the next Christmas, God bless us, every one. And that's it. They all live happily ever after. Check this out over here. Some of the other goodies that Marvel was serving up in 1978. Thor, Captain America, amazing. What a time to be alive. And here on the back cover we can see another Mighty Marvel Classics adaptation, and this time it's Alice in Wonderland. It's not actually next month's though, it's the previous issue, number 35. A Christmas Carol is issue number 36, and the last of the 36 issues. Now, I've not actually read that one, although I do have a lovely omnibus edition of all 36 issues, which I'll have to finish off at some point. But anyway, that is for another time. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that's it for tonight. We've done it. We've read the whole of the Marvel Classics Comics adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And very shortly, it's going to be time for the magical Mr. E to put on his nightgown and head up to bed. But let's just stop off at camera 1 first and bid each other a very good night. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really do appreciate it. If you could like and share this video, that would be in the spirit of Christmas. And if you could subscribe to Golem Telly if you haven't done so already, well, God bless you, everyone. I'll be back in a few days' time with my New Year's special. In the meantime, please enjoy the rest of your evening, have a wonderful Christmas, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Evening shadows deepen.